Armed robbery of a store by a minor criminal, arrest and sentencing. Introduction. The basis of the case is the armed robbery of a store by a minor criminal, Tony Soprano. After the crime was committed, the criminal was caught on security cameras several times, which made it possible to catch Soprano and present him before the court. The young man was sentenced to imprisonment for 3 years, and in case of good behavior, he will be able to be released conditionally. The crime committed. Tony Soprano committed an armed robbery by threatening a convenience store clerk with a gun. The criminal parked next to the store came in and demanded money from the seller from the cash register, threatening them with a gun. After the money was received, the criminal left the store and drove away in his car. He got on the security cameras, which later recorded the movements of the offender. Further, during further movements, the Soprano was caught on camera once again, which gave the police the opportunity to catch the criminal and take him into custody. In this case, the term juvenile delinquency is applicable since the criminal who committed the armed robbery has not yet reached the age of majority. Arrest through sentencing. This case is characterized by several actions that form the basis of the juvenile justice process. The offender was identified by giving evidence to the seller, who was the victim of an armed attack. The police received a large amount of information about the offender, as well as recordings from surveillance cameras on which Soprano's path was captured. The next stage was the capture of the offender and the seizure of weapons and stolen money. To punish the guilty person, the authorities needed to establish the criminal's identity. After the capture, confiscation of money, weapons, and identification of the offender, the police need to take him into custody. To comply with all the rules, police officers explained the rights of the offender, talked about the motives of detention, and that the offender has the right to help and the protection of a lawyer. The critical stage of the process is to work with witnesses and victims. Since the robbery was committed late at night, there were no witnesses, but the store clerk, who was a victim of the crime, was interviewed by the prosecutor. The prosecutor is a representative of the state prosecution and will take part in the trial. In addition to the prosecutor, the investigation of the crime and sentencing will be handled by judges and juries. After the entire collection of information, the prosecutor will provide all the necessary information to the jurors, who will decide by voting on the guilt of the defendant. As for Tony Soprano, he will need to hire a lawyer who will represent his interests. After many hearings, the court will decide on the punishment or release of the criminal. Various proofs and evidence will be presented and considered that will allow us to reach a verdict. At the stage of providing evidence, the task of the state prosecution will be to insist on the most severe punishment of the criminal since his violation could harm human life. The mission of the lawyer will be to protect the defendant from punishment or reduce the sentence. At the stage of the trial, the role of the criminal may also weigh since if he pleads guilty before the court sessions begin, the sentence may be reduced. The trial is a lengthy process as the parties will seek to defend themselves and provide various pieces of evidence. In the case of Tony Soprano and his crime, the court will decide to arrest him for at least 3 years. Nevertheless, the court's decision is also that the sentence can be changed in case of the positive behavior of the criminal. If the Soprano demonstrates good behavior, he can be paroled. Aggravating circumstances that had a significant impact on sentencing are that the offender not only robbed the store but also brought with him a firearm with which he threatened human life and health. Conclusion. In conclusion, the criminal offense that was committed by the juvenile delinquent Tony Soprano was that he robbed a store while armed with a pistol. He was caught by the police and taken into custody as he threatened a person with a weapon and committed theft of funds. The investigation process includes the arrest of the criminal and taking him into custody. Then the prosecutor collected all the necessary evidence and evidence of the offender's guilt. Soprano also hired a lawyer who was charged with protecting the interests of the offender. Having collected all the necessary data, the parties appeared before a jury of jurors who listened to each of them. Further, the jury made a decision, based on which the judge later issued the final verdict. The court decided to punish the criminal with a prison sentence of at least 3 years with the possibility of parole.